The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
Recently, researchers at the University of Toronto designed a new cancer drug in just 30 days. They couldn't have done it without the use of artificial intelligence. Tonight, how AI could revolutionize medical research and medicine itself. Then, Steve Paikin talks to writer and former advisor in the Prime Minister's office, Omer Aziz, about his memoir, Finding Identity Between Worlds. It's Thursday, April 13th, and that's next on The Agenda. The arrival suddenly of artificial intelligence in people's everyday lives has unsettled even those normally very bullish on new technologies. But what if the raw power of this technology could mean finding potential cures and treatments in weeks rather than years or decades? That's already happening. So let's find out more with, in Palo Alto, California, Daphne Koller, co-founder and CEO of the biotech company in Citro, and an adjunct professor of computer science and pathology at Stanford University. In Atlanta, Georgia, Anant Matabushi, professor of biomedical engineering at the Georgia Institute of Technology and Emory University. And here in our studio, Laura Rosella, professor and Canada Research Chair in Population Health Analytics at the University of Toronto, and education lead at Temerty Center for Artificial Intelligence Research and Education in Medicine. Welcome, Laura.
Thank you so much.
In studio, and to those on the line. So, last month, more than 1,800 people signed a letter, including Elon Musk and Apple co-founder Steve Wozniak, calling for a 6-month pause on the development of AI. Laura, I'm going to start with you. Many are clearly concerned about the downside of AI, but how would you characterize the promise of AI in advancing science, especially in medicine and in healthcare?
Yeah, well, in science and in medicine, we use data for all of our tasks, to test hypotheses, to develop models, to make discoveries, to make predictions. And so AI and machine learning is helping us use more data we couldn't use before, much more quickly in a much more sophisticated way. So the idea is that we can actually take the promise of that new efficiency and new ability to look at new data, and that'll enhance the scientific work that we do faster and perhaps open up new avenues.
All right, same question to you, Anant. How would you characterize sort of the promise of AI in advancing the medical field?
Yeah, thank you, Jan. I think the opportunity is tremendous for AI in health and medicine, particularly when you think about some of the big challenges and problems that we face today, problems around health disparities, problems around global health, particularly in low and middle income countries, areas of the world where there is not a pathologist or a radiologist in the entire country. And that's where I see the big opportunity for artificial intelligence to really make a difference in those areas of the world that really are underserved and don't have access to medicine and healthcare, and AI really being that great leveler.
Daphne, is AI ushering in a new era of science?
I think it is, because as Laura said, we are in a world where we have the opportunity to collect a tremendous amount of data about human biology, and human biology is incredibly complicated, far too complicated for the human mind to fully understand. And many of the diseases that remain with unmet need today are probably not one disease, and we're probably not characterizing them correctly. Alzheimer's is not a single disease. And if we're able to collect enough data about human biology and use the power of machine learning and artificial intelligence to disentangle what we see there, maybe we can finally characterize the right subsets of patient population and find interventions that have a meaningful effect size. And that would be transformative.
With that, I want to look at some recent advancements in medicine using AI. Science Magazine's 2021 Breakthrough of the Year was powered by AI and its ability to predict protein structures in the body. Last month, researchers used artificial intelligence to detect Alzheimer's risk with over 90% accuracy, and earlier this year, researchers used AI to discover a potential new cancer drug in less than 30 days in what usually takes years or even decades. Laura, I'm going to come to you. Machine learning and AI have been around for a while. What is happening now that is enabling these breakthroughs? You sort of mentioned it a little bit off the top. Data.
Yeah, we have the data that we just did not have before. So the fundamental, mathematical basis of AI and machine learning has been around for a while, but we did not have the amount of data that we have now and the granularity of that data. And then we didn't have the computational ability to process that data. So theoretically, we could do this, but now we can actually practically do it. We have the horsepower behind it to actually make these discoveries happen. And that's been the biggest change.
This is something that we harp on here in this country, is that in Canada, we don't have a lot of data. Where are we getting our data from? Is this publicly sourced data? Where are we scouring for it?
Yeah, the data come from lots of different sources. So from the biological point of view, data can come from the cells and what we measure at the cellular level and the biological level. For data I work with on humans, we get it from interactions with the healthcare system. We're doing more and more surveys and detailed measurements. It can come from non-traditional sources like social media, our devices. And so it's actually coming from all these different places. I work with environmental data, so it's coming from the sensors that measure things in the environment, images in the environment. So it's not coming from one place, it's coming from many places. And it's very variable. That's the hardest part about it.
I was going to say, is there some biases to this with science? It's
Absolutely.
very methodical in terms of how we get our data. Is there bias in some of the data that we have?
Yes, there's a lot of bias. And this is the part that makes people probably the most uncomfortable. The data generating processes are non-random when we work with this data. I, as an epidemiologist, obsessed with bias a lot. So we think carefully about what the biases are, how we can mitigate it against them. And of course, having more data, independent replication, making sure we're not just working in one center, but multiple centers. These are some of the ways we overcome some of the biases.
All right, Anant, I want to come back to you. I want to go back to the recent advancement and sort of the excitement. What areas of research are you seeing the most exciting results using AI?
So I think that there's been a lot of progress around AI for diagnostics. I think there are something like 300 technologies that have now been approved by the FDA in the United States for primary diagnosis of multiple different indications. There's a lot happening in the realm of ophthalmology. There's work that's going on in the cardiology space. But looking forward, I think beyond disease diagnosis, I think the opportunity is tremendous when it comes to predicting outcome, when it comes to predicting therapeutic response. And I think that that's where I see the next frontier, where we, in the United States, for instance, 40% of the adult population is going to be diagnosed with some form of cancer in their lifetime. And the big question is, how do you manage these patients? We know that you can't be hitting all these patients up with aggressive treatments. I think a big question for us today is better management for patients with a disease. And I believe that the next frontier will be the use of AI to help tailor the appropriate treatment strategies and management options for patients going forward.
Daphne, my natural follow-up is, how is AI changing the discovery of new drugs to treat said range of diseases?
So I think first and foremost is identification of the right patient population, because I think we have some really compelling treatments today, but when you apply them at the population level, you have some subset that responds and a very large number that do not. And for those that do not respond, you've basically introduced a tremendous amount of toxicity. You've prevented them from benefiting from a treatment that might actually help them. So I think disentangling the complexity of disease to understand what are the right population subsets so that you can create a therapeutic intervention with a meaningful effect size is a critical part of it. And then the next part is identifying intervenable causal nodes, that if you actually modulate those nodes, those proteins or other metabolites in the body, it will actually make a difference to that coherent group of patients. And we're seeing a tremendous amount of development on the drug discovery side in first deconvoluting the patient population, interrogating causality, and then figuring out how to construct chemical matter of whether it's a small molecule or a large molecule or a gene therapy that would actually make a meaningful difference in intervening at that node. So I think there's just progress all throughout that process that's happening and is being driven by AI.
Daphne, what have you come up with in terms of that research there?
So in our work, first of all, I want to return to Laura's point. We take very great care in how we collect and generate our data. So in addition to collecting data from human populations, we also have a cell factory that generates stem cells and from human-derived populations, patients, healthy controls, so that we can actually measure disease at the cellular level. And so we have done some really exciting work in various diseases in neuroscience as well as in oncology, and uncovered what we believe are a compelling new class of targets for genetic epilepsies, which is the first therapeutic area that we moved into, as well as in the domain of cancer, identified both new targets as well as, importantly, new patient populations for drugs that already exist, are quite safe, are effective, but are not deployed in the right patient populations. And so those are the fastest path to clinical impact for getting into patients, because the path of getting from a target to an approved drug is quite a long one. Working with an existing drug is sometimes a much faster path.
All right, Laura, I'm going to come to you. We're going to get granular in our research here. You used a machine learning model to analyze health data of 2.1 million people living in Ontario. What were you able to discover?
We were able to accurately predict who among that population would develop diabetes in the next 5 years, type 2 diabetes. And the idea behind it is, if we understand who can develop type 2 diabetes, who is likely to, we can prevent it. Type 2 diabetes can be prevented. We have well-known interventions that can prevent the onset or delay the onset of type 2 diabetes. So if we know who's most at risk, we can target those interventions more appropriately.
How accurate can we get? Can we get to the individualness?
This is a good question. I mean, no model really gets to the individual level per se, because what machine learning does and what all of these models do is say someone that looks like this with these characteristics, on average, this is their likelihood of developing an outcome. So we can be very accurate for an individual, certainly, but every individual will have slight nuances for sure. But much more accurate than me just trying to guess, oh, yeah, you have 1, 2, or 3 risk factors, you're probably going to develop diabetes. We can then use hundreds of variables, much more nuanced information. We're going to get much closer to our ability to predict the fact that you will or will not develop diabetes.
All right, my next question, it's a dangerous one because we could get in the weeds here.
For sure.
But how were you able to do that exactly? Is there an example that we can sort of understand of how you were able to sort of hone in on people who were at higher risk?
Yeah, I mean, so simplistically, the way these models work is they go through all these variables and they lump together characteristics that are most likely appearing in individuals that do develop diabetes and do not, and they essentially sort through and trying to identify common patterns between those individuals. It's a lot more complicated than that, but we take in information on the history, past interactions with the health system, other conditions they might have, other risk factors, their age. And so putting all these things together, you can come up with a score to determine, based on all these factors put together, this person's likely to develop an outcome. And in this case, we know what we're trying to predict,
right,
which is type 2 diabetes. But sometimes these methods can be used where we don't know. We're just trying to group some groups together that might be more similar than others. And in that case, it's much more of a discovery angle, saying, we know there's some commonality here. We don't know yet what to do, but we can try things. And I think that's some of the work that you heard about.
Very interesting. All right, Anant, I'm going to talk to you about another disease, cancer. How have you been able to use AI to improve outcomes for people with cancer?
Yeah, thank you for that, Jan. So our group has been really interested in how we could use AI with routinely acquired data. So talking about radiologic scans, CT scans, MRI scans, but also pathology images, to be able to really figure out which of these patients has the more aggressive variant of the disease and therefore is going to benefit from more aggressive treatments like radiation or chemotherapy, vis-a-vis those patients where perhaps the disease is not quite as aggressive. And some of these patients might benefit from perhaps no chemotherapy or a lower dosage of radiation therapy, or in some cases, like in the case of prostate cancer, there are several men who might benefit from no intervention at all because we have a much less aggressive variant of the disease. And so there's a big opportunity that we're finding with AI, with machine learning, to be able to tease out patterns from these radiologic samples images, from the pathology images, to be able to really help risk stratify those patients who need the more aggressive treatment regimens versus those patients who might benefit from a less aggressive variation of treatment strategies because they have a more indolent or less aggressive cancer.
Daphne, in your experience with drug discovery, to what extent is AI helping us discover things that human scientists could never discover?
So I would like to begin where Anant left off, which is with the incredible amount of information that exists in images such as histopathology and radiology. And in many of those cases, when we apply machine learning to those images, we uncover patient populations that humans would never have been able to identify. Subtle patterns within the histopathology images, which is an incredibly information-rich source, and also collected abundantly, because pretty much every solid cancer patient has a biopsy taken as part of the standard of care. And so we've been able to take those large populations within, say, breast cancer, within colorectal cancer, and identify patient subgroups where a particular gene seems to be driving the cancer in ways that are not necessarily the case for other patients that have what is labeled as the same cancer as part of their medical record. And that driver gene is now a novel cancer target, but importantly, neither the patient population nor the fact that that gene is driving the cancer would have been identified by a human pathologist because the patterns there are too subtle for a person to have necessarily picked up on. Now, what's interesting is that sometimes once we've discovered that, we've developed methods for visualization, for explainability, so that we can show the pathologist what it is that the cancer is picked up on. And that's important because it also allows us to gain confidence that what's been discovered is not artifactual, it's actually real, it's not some kind of a biases in the data, as Laura was alluding to earlier, but it also helps teach the pathologists something new about tumors and how the cancer is different in different populations. So so it teaches us new biology at the same time that it uncovers potential new and impactful intervention nodes.
All right, with that, let's talk about some of the challenges here. And to get into that, I want to read a quote from Scientific American. AI is currently hampered by a lack of transparency. This lack of transparency has been nicknamed the black box problem because no one can see inside the network to explain its thought process. Not only does this opacity undermine trust in the results, it also limits how much neural networks can contribute to humans' scientific understanding of the world. First off, Laura, why can't we see into this black box?
Well, the black box is an issue, but I actually think we need to get much more specific about what we mean.
Let's do it.
And Daphne alluded to this as well. So to me, there's at least three parts of the black box. There's interpretability. We need to know what's in these models. Explainability. How are the different components contributing to how the model makes decisions? And then there's transparency, which is a big one. I would say that's the one that's probably most problematic nowadays because it's done so variable. And that is the way the model is constructed needs to be very clearly documented, standardized. It needs to be reproducible. Someone needs to be able to independently verify it. And so right now, none of those things are happening consistently, and all of that's contributing to the black box. And so once we do have those things in place, I think we'll feel a lot more comfortable. It's not as simple as, oh, I just need to look under the hood and see what's in the model and all is okay. All those aspects actually need to be working for us to feel more comfortable.
In terms of the black box and sort of AI's contribution, when a scientist goes in, are we getting a step-by-step in terms of how it got to that result?
Not consistently. And some of it we can't fully explain.
Right.
So some of it is something that, oh, this is new. This is a pattern I wasn't expecting. We haven't seen this before, which is not necessarily a problem, but it means it has to be verified. Someone else in another institution might want to verify that. We might want to check it. We might want to do further experimentation. So it's just a step one. But it's pretty complicated. It's not as simple as just saying, oh, these are the variables in the model and stopping there.
All right, we're going to pick up on that a little later, but I want to bring Daphne into this. How big of a challenge is the black box problem?
I think it both is and is not. So there's techniques that people have developed, including ourselves, to help people see into the black box and sort of interpret what it is that the computer is picking up on. And it's especially easy in the context of images because you can visualize different variables and what it is in the image space that give rise to different conclusions. And so that gives, I think, people a much greater sense of confidence about what is going on. I think the other aspect, which is important to emphasize in drug discovery specifically, is that where the hypothesis came from matters up to a point, but ultimately you're going to be subject to the same rigorous test that every other drug is subject to, which is a randomized clinical trial. And so in the same way that we don't necessarily ask people where a particular drug hypothesis came from when we go into the clinical trial phase, because we know that there is a sort of fundamental ground truth verification process, which is, does this work on a randomized case control population? And I think that's a really important component that that gives us confidence in any drug that we put into a human.
And in general, if we can't understand or see how AI has arrived to some potential promising results, we throw the words of confidence and transparency. How can we trust those results?
Yeah, so thanks for that, Jay. And just to keep things interesting, I'm going to be a little contrarian and maybe disagree a little bit with Daphne there. So I can give a very specific example of where the black box really came back to hurt us. About 6 years ago, we were working on a project looking at the use of AI to predict heart failure from endomyocardial biopsies. And we trained a network. We were able to demonstrate from a single institution that this network was able to predict the risk of heart failure based on what the network had learned or what the black box had learned from these biopsy images. And we were stunned by the results. We actually showed in a paper that the black box outperformed cardiac pathologists by 25%. We were ecstatic. But the postscript to that story is that a few months later, we got another tranche of images from that same institution. And when we ran the network again, the performance fell from the 97% that we'd achieved on the first pass to a 75% result, which was more in line with what the pathologists had been getting. And we found out only after much interrogation that what had happened between the first tranche of images and the second tranche of images was that a remote software upgrade had been applied to the scanner that had been used to digitize the slides. And that very subtle change in the appearance of the images had perturbed the network enough that it had drastically changed its performance from the 97% to down to 75%. And so because of that experience, our group has really focused on very intentionally interpretable approaches. And while we talk about the promise of AI to discover things that we don't know, one of the things to consider in all of this is that there is a huge body of knowledge that has been amassed for many diseases over the course of decades and potentially hundreds of years. Let's take histopathology as one example that Daphne referenced as well. Pathologists have been looking at slides under a microscope for over 100 years. And there's a deep well of knowledge that we have about the kind of hallmarks and patterns that are associated with more aggressive and less aggressive disease. The challenge is that pathologists don't do a very good job in terms of reproducibly identifying these hallmarks. And that's where I think the AI can be so powerful, because if the AI could help identify in a reproducible fashion these patterns, these hallmarks, then we are able to have very intentionally interpretable AI from the get-go and can demonstrate its relevance for diagnosis, prognosis, and treatment response prediction.
Laura, I'm going to go to that China. Yeah, Daphne, if you want to respond, yes.
I'd love to respond, if that's okay. So I completely agree that there is an incredible body of knowledge and that we should be mindful of that. But I think if we just focus on reproducibly and reliably doing what a pathologist can already do, we are missing an incredible opportunity to discover new concepts. And I will refer back to a paper that I wrote back in 2011, which was one of the first machine learning analyses of histopathology data, which basically discovered the importance of the tumor microenvironment to cancer prognosis at a time when we did not realize that as a community. So it was one of the first earliest harbingers of the importance of the tumor microenvironment, specifically because we did not restrict the model to trying to do something that replicated what pathologists are already doing. So that being said, I completely agree that this needs to be done with care. There needs to be replication, ideally across distinct hospitals, not just doing with verification within a single hospital system and a single scanner device, but really replication across ideally multiple cohorts. There needs to be an explainability component trying to help us understand what the machine is picking up on. And as I said, in the context of drug discovery, the ultimate proof is a randomized clinical trial, which is really hard to fake. So I think I agree that we need to do this with very great care, and that it's easy, especially with modern day machine learning, to fall into a trap of getting to ridiculously high performances that are not driven by anything that is biologically meaningful. Completely agree with that, but I don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater in preventing the machine from identifying new and important insights that a person did not previously discover.
All right, moving on. Laura, we know AI can detect patterns and make predictions when it's got massive amounts of data. We know it's limited in sort of explaining why something is happening and what is causing it. Does this mean that AI will never replace human scientists? There's a fear out there with every industry, right?
Yeah.
That AI is coming for us. But in this, with science, this is a different realm. But the amount of progress that's been made is quite tremendous.
Yeah, I don't think of the term replace when I think of AI. And lots of people go there right away. I always think of augmenting. And so I think it'll augment the work of scientists for sure. And causality and understanding why things happen is a great example. There are important parts of that process. It's a multi-step process and some pretty key steps that need to be taken to really understand why. And machine learning can play a role in some of those steps and actually can help us get to that more quickly. It can open us up our eyes to new possibilities that we weren't seeing before, but we still have to go through all the steps. So I don't see it replacing. I mean, I'm a little hesitant to make any predictions in this space, given the progress we've seen in the past year, even. But I see it much more as augmenting the work that scientists do, and still making sure that we keep the rigor and the domain knowledge that we've amassed over the years in that process.
Anant, I want to get your take on that as well.
Yeah, so I think that these prophecies of doom are not new, right? So AI is going to take away the clinician's job. AI is going to replace the pathologist. AI is going to replace the radiologist. As a history buff, I've gone back and looked at some of the stories that came out 30 years ago in the context of digital mammography. When digital mammography came out in the late 80s or early 90s, and some initial image analysis machine learning companies were stood up to analyze digital mammography, you could see these prophecies of doom. You're not going to need radiologists anymore. You fast forward 3 decades on, we still have a paucity of radiologists. We have a shortage of pathologists. So I agree 100% that we really need to be thinking about augmentation. We need to be thinking about assisting. And I think that one of the things that's been said more recently about AI is that, yes, it is likely that in the next 5 to 10 years, the radiologist or the pathologist who is using AI might obviate the radiologist or pathologist who does not.
Daphne, could AI develop to the point where it can create its own genuine scientific understanding? I might be going a stretch here, but think like an AI Einstein.
Boy, I tend to be wary of predictions saying AI will never do X, Y, and Z, because in the past, whenever we have made such predictions, they have turned out to be, in many cases, false. So I don't know if never, but honestly, I tend to agree with Laura that scientific endeavor is one of the places where it's the ultimate creativity of the human mind, and it is certainly the case that a human can be hugely supercharged, if you will, by having access to the kind of interrogation tools that allow a human to extract patterns and insights from very large amounts of data, which the human mind will never be able to process. But I think that the partnership between the human and the computer is where we're going to see the greatest insights. Now, will a computer come up with insights on its own? Probably, but I still think that the greatest insights are going to come from that partnership.
All right, Laura, it's been said that when Einstein made his big breakthrough with relativity, only a handful of people in the world actually understood it. Could AI, or an AI Einstein, produce a scientific breakthrough that no human could understand?
So I think that an AI could generate a starting step of a discovery that we will eventually understand. So I think that signals will come up. Some of them will be false. Some of them will be because of a bias or a spurious finding, and we have to do a process to get there. And some of them truly will be new paths of understanding that we did not yet have. So I think it could start us on that path. And I'm confident, though, that eventually with the processes that we use in science, we will eventually understand. It might take us time, though. So it might be signaling us something that we don't yet understand, but I'm confident that we will be able to get there in time.
All right, we are going to leave it there. Daphne, Anand, Laura, thank you so much for joining us on the program. Very, very riveting stuff. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great.
We can list off the things that Omer Aziz is. He's a lawyer, a writer, a former foreign policy advisor to Prime Minister Trudeau, and currently he's a Radcliffe Fellow at Harvard University. But all of that may say very little about him, as his new book lays out in a frank and thoughtful rumination on what makes us who we are. The book is called Brown Boy, a Memoir, and it brings Omer Aziz to our studio. It's good to see you again.
Good to see you, Steve.
Every time you've been on this program in the past, I think it's been on the satellite, so it's great to have you in the flesh here.
It's good to be here.
I'm going to open with a real chippy in-your-face question, okay?
Sure.
A lot of people write a memoir near the end of their lives. How old are you?
Well, I am in my early 30s, and it's a good question. I've gotten it before, Steve. What I'll say is, sometimes those of us who have lived from a different perspective, we see a lot of experience in a short number of years. That's the first point, right? The second point is, I actually started writing this as a novel. People might not know this, but when I was at Yale Law School, I fictionalized some of this. And the problem that I had was many editors didn't believe some of it. So I had to speak with authority, and I wanted to put my own story on the line and say, okay, this actually happened. And this is how it went down, and that I'm going to show a story using my personal narrative, but talking about broader issues. So I would say that, yes, I am young, one could say, for writing a memoir, but I would submit there is wisdom and thought in there, and it will engage readers of different backgrounds.
I would sign on to all of the above. It really will. Let's do an excerpt from the book. Sheldon, if you would, bring this graphic up. My parents, immigrants and Muslims, were conflicted about how I should approach the world, to assimilate entirely or hold fast to my roots. I was torn within myself, trying to be two people at once, part of two cultures, finding acceptance in neither. So I boomeranged between invisibility and presence, between misperception and clarified reality, always trying to blend in, chameleon-like, with my environment. I had become a hyphenated man. No, I was the hyphen. That encapsulates so much in that one paragraph, so let's start from the beginning. You grew up in Scarborough, Ontario. Describe your childhood.
So my parents were immigrants from Pakistan. My father came in the 70s as a student. He was part of the great migration of people, the great immigration of people to Canada. My mother was a teacher from Murray in the villages of Pakistan up in the mountains. And they came to Canada, and I was born in 1990 in Scarborough General Hospital. And I grew up in a multiracial, multicultural upbringing in Scarborough. It was very diverse. That's what I remember about it. And I wrote about this in the Globe, but it was a very diverse working class, middle class environment. We didn't have a lot. We were far away from the center of Toronto, but we had each other, and we had love, and we had a lot of culture, and we had a lot of language and really good food as well. And I think it was in that environment where so many immigrant families were together. And Steve, it was a beautiful thing as I reflect on it, because my parents and I, like so many immigrant families, we were growing up together. I was growing up in this world, but so were they. You know, they were in their 30s, 40s at the time, and they had come to Canada and they were living their dream and trying to keep a roof over our heads and ensure that their kids would have a shot at a beautiful and better life. And I'm sitting here with you today, so I feel like they succeeded. And I constantly am thinking about Scarborough and my roots, no matter what room I'm in.
How were you caught between two worlds, betwixt and between, during your childhood upbringing in Scarborough?
Sure. So my father was quite secular and is quite secular, and he believed that we should assimilate. And my mother believes that we should stick closer to our roots and to our religion, right? So there was this kind of like almost an emotional back and forth between the two perspectives. And then I would go to the mosque as well. Mother would take us to the mosque. So I would wake up in the morning and I would be, say, a Canadian child going out into the world and going to school. And then at home, I would be more of a Pakistani child speaking Urdu with my mother and late grandmother, God bless her. And then I would go to the mosque and I would learn about Islam and religion, and I would rinse and repeat every single day. So I was living in multiple worlds even as a child, and I think that gave me a great appreciation for different people's perspectives and the diversity that we all carry.
It was a diverse neighborhood, to be sure, and yet you say, my childhood brain was only focused at all hours on keeping my English unaccented, my heritage undetected, my color unseen. How come?
Because I would go to school and I would feel very ashamed of who I was.
Why?
Because I was worried about the students making fun of my mother's accent. I was worried about my mother picking me up and wearing a shalwar kameez and that they would say something bad about her. I was worried about the children who were mostly white talking about her Paki dot, as they would say. I was worried about racial slurs. All I wanted to do was to fit in. And when you look different and you're a kid, and you worship differently and you have a different name, that really stings you sometimes.
You were worried about all that, but did you run into much of that?
I did. I mean, there was obviously the schoolyard bullying and racial slurs like the word Paki, for example, which originates in neo-Nazi circles. I was called that, and even later on I was dealing with it as well. But I think it was more of the shame and the guilt that I was carrying with me. And as I got older, I really wanted to interrogate and think about where that shame came from. Because when I learned more about my culture and religion, I learned that Islam is a beautiful religion, a beautiful history. Pakistan and India have a beautiful, long, syncretic history. Urdu is a beautiful language of poetry. So I would learn all these things, and I kind of felt like I had been duped. Like, who had believed this myth that, our languages and our accents and our cultures, that there was something wrong with them? So I think that maybe Canadian society at the time wasn't as prepared. Maybe it was more acceptable. You know, we were different, we did look different, but I would say that those immigrants in Scarborough, my family, were as Canadian as they get.
2 years after 9/11, you moved to Mississauga, and you're now in high school, and you write, I began to assemble my latest mask. What was the mask?
You know, we all go through life trying on different identities, right? Especially as we get older. And for me, I was trying on these different masks, as I call them. And the mask for me when I got to high school was that I wanted to be a tough guy. You know, I didn't want anyone to touch me. I was done having people make fun of me.
Omer, you're not that tall today. How big were you in high school?
I was stronger.
Okay. I was going to say, you playing the tough guy at 5 foot not much is, I don't know how you were going to pull that off.
Well, I mean, that's true. Although height is only a part of it, Steve, as you know, right?
Okay.
But I would say, I mean, look, in playing football, playing rugby, at the same time, Floyd Mayweather and Roy Jones Jr., the greatest boxers in the world, are not that tall either.
Not that big, that's
right?
true.
So it really matters how much spirit and energy that you have, right? I mean, Dr. King, Dr. Martin Luther King. Steve, it's something I've been thinking about, that the day my book came out yesterday was also the anniversary of Dr. Martin Luther King's assassination.
Yes.
So I've been reflecting and thinking about it. But, when you get to school, I wanted to not be pushed around and not bullied around. And it was a matter of presenting myself and taking on a new attire and trying to, stay away from the difficulties, but really not being bullied around anymore. I was done being a victim.
This book is quite a revelation, if I may say, for me,
Sure.
because I've only known you in your sort of post-academic life. You're a guy with 3 university degrees, including Yale, and yet you write, in 2006, the Toronto 18 were arrested. People will remember this. They were trying to bomb Parliament, behead Prime Minister Harper. And you write, I quietly asked myself what sort of reality these boys had been living, and the answer came, they had been living mine. I just can't imagine you all in the same bucket.
Why not?
Well, for the reasons just stated. You are a well-spoken, highly educated, having worked in the Prime Minister of Canada's office. You, to me, don't seem to have anything in common with those other guys, and yet you kind of think you do.
Yeah, well, I did at 16. You know, I was a brown boy in Mississauga, and my name was misspelled and misspoken by all the teachers, so I wasn't someone with a Yale law degree at 16. I just got to school, and everyone was talking about Muslims, kids that we had gone to school with, becoming terrorists and planning these horrific attacks. And at the time, there was, again, a lot of fear, there was a lot of confusion. But you have to understand, Steve, when we're coming up, like, this is just a snapshot, right? Like, that scene is just a snapshot. There's a longer arc and a longer journey. And I was a poor kid at school, by the way. I mean, I wasn't good at school, right? I got bad grades, I was apathetic, I was indifferent, and I was, in fact, the worst kind of student, which treated as a lost cause.
And yet, you turned out the way you turned out, and they clearly turned out the way they turned out.
Yeah, but if I made
that?
Sure, but I mean, imagine, this is what I say, when you're a person of color in the West, and even in Canada, to this day, you're walking on ice. What does that mean? If you do make a mistake, fine. These guys, they were really plotting something different. But if you make a mistake and the criminal justice system gets you, it's very likely that you're going to be stuck and caught in that system. So often it's just a matter of a few degrees. It's a matter of a few missteps. And if you slip up, and I could have slipped up, but if you slip up, you might be done. And that's the difference.
You were fortunate to have watched television one day and seen somebody on the air who may have changed your life.
Yeah.
You want to tell us who that was?
Sure. So I got home from school one day, and I was 17 years old and going into or starting 12th grade. So, you know, very pivotal year in Canada for academics. And then the TV was on, my grandmother was watching, and there was a tall, skinny person named Barack Hussein Obama who was running for president of the United States. And I remember just being so captivated by that because I had never seen someone who looked like me, had darker skin, had a Muslim name, and was running, you know, wasn't in entertainment or wasn't in these other fields or athletics, with all respect to them, but was running for president, running for chief executive of the United States. So I had to sit back. I was kind of shocked, actually. And I thought, I've never seen this. Someone so eloquent, well-read, who could have been a member of my family, frankly. And that changed everything for me. You know, we talk a lot about diversity and representation. Until a child or a kid or a teenager sees someone that looks like them, resembles them, and is doing interesting things, their conception of the world rarely changes.
It's the old story. If you can see it, you can be it.
Exactly.
I've heard that so many times. Okay, you end up going to Queen's University in Kingston. You then spend a semester in Paris, where you write, "The past had finally overwhelmed my future." What is that a reference to?
Well, I mean, in Paris, I had this mental breakdown, actually. I had a very, very difficult mental breakdown in Paris. And I thought that all the goals I was chasing, and I remember in first year of Queens, I'd worked very hard. I had a reverse culture shock because I went from a multiracial community to a white majority community. You know, obviously I was migrating social classes as well, and I felt very alienated there, and I wanted to leave Canada. And I went to Paris, and Paris was even more isolating. And I have a quote there from the great French-Algerian writer Albert Camus, that if you can survive a year alone in a room in Paris, he says you can survive anything, basically. Yeah. And that's kind of what happened. And then, you know, I had this mental breakdown and depression, and I sort of lost all my motivation. I stopped going to class. I was very, very disheartened. You know, I felt like, what was I doing all this for? Just to chase credentials and grades. And as I reflected on that while writing the book, Steve, I learned that many people of color and many minorities quietly suffer with mental health, with depression. It's not really talked about in our community either. You're just meant to be strong and meant to keep going on.
Is part of that because you don't think you're good enough for either world?
Maybe. I mean, there's just like a stigma, right? Like, you have to think about it. My father was born in 1952, which means that for the first 15, 16 years of his life, Pakistan was a new country. But what does that mean? My grandparents were colonized. My great-grandparents were colonized. This is just fact. What does that mean? Well, people will say, well, they were colonized in British India. What it means is you do not have authority over your own house. You can step outside into the world, you can think you have authority, but the white man, the British man, rules. He will tell you what to do, he will tell you whether you can get a job, whether you can serve in government. And that's what my grandparents and great-grandparents went through. That was a colonized generation.
But not you. You didn't go through that.
Well, we're all legatees and we're all inheritors, right? History doesn't start in 1989 or 1990, right? So my grandmother raised my father with the values she was raised with. My father and mother raised me with their values. And there's an intergenerational story here. And we can come back to this, but one thing about colonialism I do want to say because we hear that word a lot and we hear about monuments and stuff. And I think, as I write about in the book, Steve, one of the great ills of colonialism was it ruptured the relations between father and son, mother and daughter, parents and children. What do I mean by that? When you're a father, when you're a parent, you're passing on stories, you're passing on wisdom. This is how you deal with the world. This is how the world works. But if outside you have no power, someone came from far away and into your house and says, this is now my house and I run it, how will your child react to that? It ruptured the authority that parents had. It ruptured the stories. It ruptured the links between parents and children intergenerationally. And that's why many of us who were even born here, we didn't have a sense of our roots or our history.
Do you not think, though, at some point, after Queens, you went to Cambridge University, do you not think at some point, I'm here in kind of one of the most elite universities in the Western world, mingling happily among, white people?
Yeah.
Did you not feel accepted, or did you not feel I've arrived?
There's moments of arrival. I mean, there's feelings where you feel like you've arrived, but then something very quickly can snap you right back and remind you that you might want to, be a little restrained and humble in dealing with the world. So
what?
Well, there is a scene in this book where I go to London to write the LSAT, and something happens that might make people gasp in the book. While I'm going to write, after writing the LSAT, trying to chase my North American dream, trying to chase my meritocracy. So yes, I mean, you have moments of arrival, but at the same time, Steve, I'm not the person who can stand in an opulent room and think this is great for me, look how successful I am, I've come so far, when I know that my friends are struggling, when I know my community is struggling, when I know that my people are being shot at in their mosques, when I know that, crimes have been committed against us. We lived through an enormous amount of trauma. And when I come back to see my family and friends in Scarborough, Mississauga, yeah, it's great to celebrate, but I'm thinking about their concerns as well. I'm thinking about people who don't go to Cambridge. I'm thinking about people who don't go to Yale Law School. I'm thinking about people who are behind me in line at the customs line trying to go to the United States and are going to get pulled aside because I showed my blue passport and my Harvard badge. So yeah, I don't want to feel like I earned these credentials and now I have a different set of rules that apply to me. I don't think any of us are free until all of us are free, and I actually mean that.
What's the biggest difference between the guy who went to high school and the guy who sits here today, a graduate of Yale University?
I think one big difference is I'm more confident in myself. I've read a lot. I've spent time reading and learning. I've spent a lot of time writing. And I think that when you begin to equip yourself with knowledge, you have the tools to understand your world. You have language to describe your world. You have language to write about your world. And so people cannot exploit you the same way. People cannot take advantage of you the same way. When you have an ability to set the narrative as well and to tell a story honestly, right? Like to tell an honest story. As much as this book is about me and it's about the self, what I hope is it uses the tools of memoir to reveal something deeper about our society. Right? Like, I think we do have a lot of narcissism in our society, and we do have a lot of me culture in our society. And yes, to go back to your first question, I am kind of young to be writing a memoir, but at the same time, if a personal story can't break through the barriers that separate us, race, class, linguistically, ethnically, then what can? Right? Like, I can sit here and make arguments all day long about what I believe, but what I really want to do is let me tell you a story, and I hope it's a good story. And I think that you can bring people in, you can invite people who aren't from your background, and you can share something, because literature is so much more than just about race or ethnicity. It's about the community and the story that we're all building together.
You got to, I guess to a certain extent, fulfill a bit of a dream in as much as you're a pretty worldly guy for a 30-something guy, and you got to be a foreign policy advisor in the office of the Prime Minister of Canada.
Yes.
Which is not a bad thing.
No.
Did that job live up to your hopes?
I mean, in some ways it did, because I wanted to, I was at a law school and I really wanted to make an impact on foreign policy. I had a lot of ideas, as you can tell. I had ideas about China and One Belt, One Road. I had ideas about Palestine, how to solve that. I had ideas about Russia and Ukraine. I had ideas about NAFTA and the Trump administration, right? We were renegotiating NAFTA. But at the same time, I kept coming up against the same limited worldviews, right? This book charts a story of discrimination and racism that I experienced. I don't want to shy away from it. I have healed from it. I've grown from it. But what I will not do is whitewash it or play it down. It did happen. I know what happened.
Discrimination in the Prime Minister's office?
In the government, I want to say.
In the government of Canada?
In the government of Canada, at the highest levels, in the departments, among the civil servants, And yes, among some political staffers as well.
Okay, let's give some examples here. And you don't name names in the book, so I won't force you to name names here.
Sure.
You wouldn't anyway, I'm sure. But you're in meetings.
Yeah.
You're in high-level meetings. And there are older, whiter people in those meetings who cut you off all the time and who essentially tell you stuff that you're all too aware of. My question is this. How do you know that's a microaggression / racist moment and not a, I'm 55, I'm 60 years old, you're a kid, I'm telling you because I know more than you?
Sure. I mean, well, that would be ageist, first of all. Actually, that's really interesting because ageism is something that I probably have to reckon with, but it's okay. At least that is something that we can get over. Racism is harder for me. It's a good question, though, Steve, and it's something that I really wrestled with. It wasn't like there was a racist incident and I was full of righteous indignation and I wanted to tweet. That's not really my personality. My personality is, let me sit with this. Let me give this person the benefit of the doubt. And in fact, because I'm a lawyer, I would actually do this. I would go to my office and I would be steaming or I would be upset or hurt and I would close the door and I would open a Word document and I would write from the perspective of the person that I was encountering with and listing all the reasons why it wasn't racist. Maybe this person was upset that day. Maybe they had a cold the day before. You know, there's so many different reasons. But ultimately, when something keeps happening, you know, one time, second time, third time, fourth time, if you don't want to look at a pattern or if you want to be willfully oblivious, that's on you. But that was...
Okay, what if the pattern is you're the youngest guy in the room and therefore they're pulling rank on you, not being racist? Well, I don't know. I'm just asking.
Well, I mean, in terms of the civil servants, with all respect, I mean, they weren't reporting to me, but as you know how Ottawa works with political staff and civil service, there were 10,000 people in the Department of Foreign Affairs, and I could get a briefing from any single one of them if I wanted to because I worked for the minister. So ageism shouldn't have been any part of the equation. But maybe they were like, you know, who is this, you know, brown guy from Yale Law School coming here? We've been working in this department for 50 years and he's gonna come and tell us what to do and what we should do. At the same time, I was there to do good work. I was there for a vision. And I was there because I believed, and we can talk about this, but I believed in the Prime Minister's vision in 2015. I championed that. I supported that. In writing, you know, the very first person, I went out there and I campaigned and I supported that. But when I went inside the government, I saw that there were some social ills like racism that were impacting us. And what bothered me was that when we were in public, we were talking about diversity and inclusion, which is really important, but that in private, staffers, civil servants were saying and doing things which, again, in 2017 might be okay. When I was working there. In 2020, the world has changed. You know, if any of that stuff happened today and someone came out in public, it would be on the news, right? So I would say I really contended with the motivations, the perspectives of the people I was working with. But when I go to a party or a meeting or a gathering at a senior official's office, in their home, and that official hands me a garbage bag and then expects that I go clean up after people when I work for the Prime Minister of Canada, something to me sits very wrong with that.
And yet, I must... Omer, you took the bag and you cleaned up the garbage.
I cleaned it up with...
You didn't tell him to go stuff himself. You actually did it. Why did you do it?
Because I was raised well. I was raised well. I was raised well and told that, you know, you need to serve the team. And that's not the moment when you have premiers and VIPs in the room. That is not the moment that I'm going to take to start an issue.
All right, well, let me get... Let's do another moment here.
Let's do another moment.
This moment was really powerful in the book. You find yourself in the Prime Minister's office alone with Justin Trudeau.
Yeah.
There were no hangers-on, no other aides in the room, which is a pretty rare moment for him because he's almost always surrounded by people. And you are having an inner debate. Do I raise some of these issues that you and I have been talking about for the last 5 minutes here? Do I raise some of this with him or not? And you ultimately decided not to. How come?
Because I thought that, you know, Steve, this might be one of my weaknesses, that I often even want to protect and be kind to the people who did harm me. I'm not out here to cast aspersions on anyone's reputation. I'm not here to disparage anyone. But in that moment, it was me, and it was the big boss, Prime Minister Trudeau. And I thought I have two options, and Pierre Trudeau's portrait is right there carrying little Justin. And I thought I can either use this moment to bring up a workplace discrimination instances with the Prime Minister of Canada, and hopefully it will be handled because he's the top person in charge, or I can convey and communicate my gratitude for what this longer story was, which is that his father, Prime Minister Trudeau, the first Prime Minister Trudeau, opened the door for my family and so many immigrants to come here.
Or you could have done both.
I could have done both, but I didn't have that much time with him. And I thought, you know, I can't bring up to the Prime Minister of Canada that there are staffers in his administration who are being racist towards me in one of our first interactions. And, you know, and also that was a meeting about Burma and about a genocide that was happening among the Rohingya Muslims, which I advocated we should be calling genocide. It just felt like the wrong moment to make it about myself, if that makes sense.
It totally makes sense.
Yeah.
No, I get it. I mean, you've got 10 seconds to figure out what you want to do here, and you made the decision you made. Can I get one more minute? I want to ask this last question. Can we do one more minute? Because I know I'm out of time. Okay, thank you, Lorraine. Let's finish here. You traveled to Pakistan, to your mother's village.
Yes.
And I wonder, at the end of the day, what did that trip offer you and mean to you?
So I thought there was one trip left to make after all these trips in this book. And it was the one place I hadn't gone to, and I'd gone everywhere, right, basically. And it was to the village of Muddy. And I went there, and I took a long flight, and we drove up this winding road, and I learned so much about my past, beautiful vistas. First thing I learned was that all the women in my mother's family were teachers, and that there were intergenerational links there, right? Aunties who had taught daughters, now the daughters had grown up, they'd become teachers. That was beautiful. Number two, the common wisdom of small town folk, you know, whether it's in Canada, America, or Muddy. Like, you know, this might surprise people, but I actually get along and feel more comfortable with ordinary people who don't have Ivy League degrees than I do in Ivy League rooms. That's because of where I came from. And then finally, third, the colonial history. Muddy was the home of British colonial officers, summer retreat, so you had colonial buildings there, the Muddy Brewery. So again, it was an east-west meeting point right there up in the mountains, and I thought that was perfect and beautiful, and it made so much sense that I embody both east and west, and I'm sitting here today.
And I'm glad about that. Brown Boy, a Memoir is the name of the book. Omer Aziz, I really enjoyed it. Thanks for coming in today to talk about it.
Thank you so much, Steve.
That is the agenda for Thursday, April 13th, 2023. Tomorrow, Nam Kiwanuka checks in on how well public health policy has learned the lessons of the past few years. And just before we go, something to check out from our Ontario hubs. Justin Chandler has a new story that helps explain how people far from the big cities are contending with the housing crisis in this province. You can find that and all the hubs coverage at tvo.org/Ontario hubs. I'm Jan Jagannathan. Thanks for watching TVO. For joining us online at tvo.org, and Nam, we'll see you tomorrow.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism. Looking for more of TVO Today's in-depth current affairs and documentaries? Visit tvo.org/newsletters to sign up for our daily newsletter with links to agenda interviews, read Steve Paikin's articles, and preview our upcoming documentaries. That's all at tvo.org/newsletters.